Hi, I'm Jane, a 14-time marathoner and running coach to runners of all levels who have big goals for themselves. So, this channel has been a huge part of my coaching journey, and it's evolved a lot since I started it in 2021. That first year, I was really just trying a lot of different things, figuring out how YouTube works, figuring out what people wanted. And so I did spend a lot of time talking about my training that year in addition to also offering coaching tips. At this point in time, it's very coaching centered, and other than really giving recaps of my marathons, I don't give a lot of updates on my own training. However, recently I received an email from a viewer of this channel, Jenny, who recently ran her first marathon and was reaching out to tell me how grateful she was for the channel and all of the advice that she received and how helpful it was on her having a really great first marathon experience. And something that really stuck out to me that she wrote in there was that her favorite part of my content was hearing about my own marathon experiences where I openly share my personal victories and challenges. So even though I don't do a lot of videos specifically centered on that necessarily, I do interject a lot of my own tidbits and my own just history in running and my history with marathons and my own experiences. And I do think people find that helpful. So this prompted me to think about how I've never really shared my full marathon journey, like starting at that first one up until now, so people could really see the full picture of how I got to where I am. I have a video where I talked about how I finally qualified for Boston, going from a 5-hour marathoner to qualifying for Boston, but just really looking at this whole picture. And no successes happen overnight, and that includes me. And sometimes I think from an outside perspective, it often seems that people get success very quickly or very easily. And when you dig down deep, it actually took them a very long time. And so I think that's what you're gonna glean from this video. Towards the end, I'm gonna be talking about what I'm training for this year and also ultimately just big takeaways that I've had in thinking back over my journey that I think will be really helpful for you as well. So let's take it from the very top. When I was 25, I ran my first marathon. I'd actually never run a half marathon. I'd only run 5Ks and 10Ks. And I don't honestly remember exactly why I decided to run a marathon other than the fact that I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. If you guys have watched enough of my videos, you know I've mentioned many times how I trained very poorly for this first marathon, had no idea what I was doing. I ran every single run too fast. I wasn't running enough. I think in my head, as long as I was getting the long runs, that's really all that mattered. I skipped a lot of runs and my heart just wasn't really in it other than the fact that I just wanted to finish. But I never really realized how terrible of an experience it was when I didn't train well. But I did end up finishing. So I ran the Long Beach Marathon in October of 2005. I was there with my mom. And the first 18 to 20 miles went okay. The last 6 miles were absolutely terrible, and I walked the majority of the last 6 miles. Honestly, it was just a pretty rough experience, and I pretty much vowed at the end I would never do one again. And I know a lot of people do that, but it really was truly so bad that it just wasn't fun for me. Didn't want to do that. So fast forward a couple of years later, my dad wanted to run a marathon. So I was 27 at this time, and my aunt wanted to run one too. And we are originally from Oregon. So we were going to run the Portland Marathon. And so I agreed. I said I would do one more in this life for them. And I did a lot of the training with my dad. I loved that experience, have really good memories from that. We ran a lot of races actually together at that time. Went to Portland to do the marathon, and none of us ran together, but we were there obviously before. I got to see my aunt who lives in Oregon. We were there at the finish, but everyone ran their own races. So I ran that one a little bit faster than I had run Long Beach. So Long Beach, I'd run 4:59, had just barely squeezed under that 5-hour mark, which I do remember being really proud of. This one I ran a 4:49. So I got a 10-minute PR, which is pretty big deal, but it didn't go much better than the first one, other than the fact that in my mind, I promised myself I would make it one more mile without walking than I did in the first one. So I think I made it to about mile 21 before I started walking. Again, spending a lot of the last of those 5 miles just walking. Every time I tried to run again after walking. It felt impossible. And yeah, just really hated the last 10K of it again, and was like, okay. Afterwards, I think I just thought, I'm not good at this. I'm bad at marathons. Like, I'm good at the shorter distances, so we'll just stick with that. Why would I keep doing this distance that I'm clearly terrible at? And I truly thought that. There was really no point at that time of thinking I could have trained better, or I didn't train properly, or I could have fueled better. I just didn't spend a lot of time researching, and I just didn't have really any understanding of what it took to run a good marathon. It was just easier to kind of say, I'm bad at this. And I've had other instances, like with skiing prior to that, where I have that same thing. When I've had other things come pretty naturally to me, more easily, even like shorter distance running, and I didn't want to work at it, And so I quit the marathon distance, and I ended up starting a family before I would come back to the marathon distance. But it wasn't like I quit marathoning to start a family, because this was in 2007. We didn't even think about starting a family until like 2010. And so it was really more just like, I'm going to give up on this distance. But I didn't stop running. I was still running other distances, and my training was always kind of sporadic. I was never super consistent or super committed to running. I just, it was the sport that I like to do, but I did it here and there. It was definitely fair weather. I wouldn't do it when it was winter and snowing, etc. So I have 3 children now. During that period from 2007 to 2017, I just really focused on having babies and raising those young children, and my career as well. I wouldn't change any of having my focus be on starting a family and having a big focus on my children during that time. But once we knew we were done having kids after our 3rd one, that's where I really started picking up my running a lot more again, and starting to think, hey, maybe I should give this marathon thing a go again. Maybe I can do a lot better than I did before. And I think my why was just stronger. I just felt like I wanted to have something just for me, after obviously being a mom, and I was a teacher and just taking care of children basically my whole life. And this felt like something I could do for me and set a really big goal for myself. And so I did. I decided to sign up for the Twin Cities Marathon. Not sure how I landed on that specifically, except that the timing was right. My husband would go out for the shorter long runs with me kind of early in the training. And then at one point I said to him, so are you running this marathon too? Because you're running all these long runs. He just kind of rolled his eyes and was like, I guess I am. So that then ended up being this thing that we were doing together, which was really, really cool. He had run his first marathon a couple of years prior, also didn't really have a good experience. So I think he was just hoping to have kind of what I was hoping to have as well, like train well and have a really good experience most of all. So that was really the training block where I spent a lot of time researching. I started listening to the Running Rogue podcast with Chris McClung. I learned so much from him. I listened to like every single episode at that time and just really soaked it all in. And it took a while for me to latch onto this concept of running slow, that most of your mileage should be easy mileage, because I literally never run that way. I used to think you should just like go out and burn yourself out every time you run, that it should be really, really hard. And so that was a huge mind shift for me. But during that training, there were some things that happened where I was like not finishing runs, where I was starting to think maybe there's something to this. Like maybe I need to trust that someone knows more than I do, let my ego go and just try it. And lo and behold, I tried it and it started working. I was building endurance. I was seeing myself get fitter. My husband was doing the same. We were pretty much just following the same program. And we were running, I think, 5 days a week pretty consistently. We never skipped long runs, and it was just very, very consistent through the entire training block. We did most of the runs that we were supposed to do, and that was a huge part of it too, is that we just kept showing up and we believed in ourselves. We believed in the training, that it was going to work, and that was it. And we ended up running Twin Cities It was a great race for both of us. I ran a 3:48:50. So it was an hour off my time from when I was 27 years old. I was now 37 years old, a mom of 3 children, and I just run a 1-hour marathon PR. And it was super exciting. I was thrilled. We were like going for a 3:40, I think. But my B goal was 4 hours. I remember I just want to get under 4 hours. So I think at the time I'm like, okay, I'll shoot for 3:40 and that'll definitely get me under 4 hours, which I wouldn't recommend that being your mindset right now. My second half was definitely slower than the first half, but not bad. It was like 6 minutes slower. I was able to run the whole way, which was one of my big goals as well. And I just remember feeling mostly really good in the second half. Experience very different than what I had had previously. So getting in the 3:40s during that time period and knowing that the BQ cutoff time was like 3:45, 3:40, depending on my age and, you know, if I was aging up in the next couple of years or when it would happen. I just knew that I was close. I was close to qualifying for Boston at that point in time. And that's when I really started to have that nugget in my head of like, okay, maybe this is possible for me, because definitely before that, I was like, who qualifies for Boston? Not normal people, certainly not me. I could never do that. And once I got that time, the wheels started turning and just started thinking, okay, like I want this goal. This is something that's really important to me and I'm going to go down this path and I'm going to try. It's worth it to me to try. And I trained a lot more consistently that year than I ever have, like starting to run more through winter, and then had a plan to run a marathon the following year. So when I was 38, I signed up for one in our state in Colorado Springs. It's called the American Discovery Trail Marathon. The different thing about this race is it's like on packed trail and gravel. And it's not really the best surface to necessarily run on, but it's like a very, very slight downhill. So that part I liked. And I ended up getting 5 minutes faster. So I ran a 3:43:22. And this was Labor Day of 2018. And at that point in time, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so close. Like, I really want this. I want to qualify for Boston. I started searching around, and that's when I learned about these Rebel races that are super, super downhill races. I'm like, okay, that's the ticket. I'm going to run this. This is going to be what gets me to Boston. Now, these races are super controversial. Everybody seems to have an opinion about these downhill races. I clearly ran one. I have my own opinions about them now that kind of reflect my own experiences I have had along the way. If that's a video that you want me to do, let me know. And I have zero judgment ever about people making these choices. Obviously I can't, because I ran one myself. But I think it's just important to remember that everybody's experiences are different and you don't always know where people are coming from. And at the end of the day, Boston lets you use them. So they are open to everyone, whether you think that they are a fair course or not. But I'm more about just be honest. If you're going to choose it because you're using it to qualify for Boston, then just say that. Be honest about that. And that's exactly why I chose it. I knew it would be a faster course, and it was. So that was only 8 or 9 weeks after I ran that other one in September, and I qualified for Boston. I got a 3:35:58. They had just brought the times down 5 more minutes. So it had been 3:45 for 40 and up, and they brought it down to 3:40 at that time. Now, even though I was only 38 when I ran this race, I was going to be 40 when the race happened in 2020. And that's the race that this particular marathon that was in Arizona, this Rebel race, qualified me for. So that's what mattered, what age you're going to be on race day. So I had to get under a 3:40. I was over 4 minutes under, and found out later that I made it, and I made the cutoff, and I did it. I was super, super excited about it. So now we've got the BQ under our belt, but I'm still marathoning, even though I'm not waiting till 2020 to run that Boston Marathon. In fact, I wanted to try to get a faster time the following year and also qualify again, or see if I could. I signed up for the St. George Marathon in 2019. Unfortunately, my husband got super sick, like the sickest I've ever seen him. that week prior. And when it came to time when we were supposed to drive to St. George, Utah, that he was not comfortable driving whatsoever. He wasn't well enough to do so. And I didn't want to drive by myself, and I didn't really have anyone else that I could drive with, or maybe that I wanted to. But ultimately, we decided to stay close to home. There was a marathon happening that same weekend in Fort Collins, which is where I went to college. It's about an hour and a half north of where we live. And by the end of the week, we drove up that day before, and he was doing much better. I registered at the expo the night before the race, and the lady was like, I've never seen anyone sign up for a marathon the day before the marathon. I said, well, don't worry, I've been training. I was supposed to run this different race, and I wasn't able to. So Longview Marathon, I highly recommend it. It's small, but if you're in Colorado, it's really good, and I just love the area. I ended up running a 3:44, so it was not my best time. I was about 9 minutes, 8-9 minutes off my best time. But it was a good race. It was a good day, right in line with honestly probably where I was with my downhill marathon, because this one was a very normal course with mostly flat, but with some hills. And it's, looking back now, it was probably very even to what I had done, knowing the courses just being really, really different. But overall, I had a really good experience. So that was 2019, the same year that I started my running blog. So I was just getting into just loving running at the time and being very obsessed with it and researching so much at the time, writing all of these different articles, and just feeling like I had a lot to teach other people, just because I'd gone through this experience of not being good at marathons, not knowing what I was doing, to being able to piece it all together, get these big PRs, qualify for Boston. And so it was just a really fun time and a really big transition for me. Obviously, my next career move that I didn't really realize necessarily that it was a career move to coaching at the time. So the following year, I turned 40. I had found out previously that I got into Boston. And so the beginning of that year, I started training for Boston with the Running Rogue podcast training group, which I think they still do. And it was all remote, and you would listen to these podcasts, and you were in a group with these other people and follow this training plan. And it was just really, really valuable. I always have trusted Chris and just felt a connection to the way he does things and his methods. And it was going really great. I was running the most mileage I ever had, getting up to 60-mile weeks prior to that. And just as we were hitting peak week, that's when COVID happened and the world shut down, and very immediately Boston canceled the race. And I was upset, but it was also like everything was getting canceled. You guys know it was such a weird time. And so I don't remember being that upset, because it was like, well, it's happening to everybody. And, I just want to keep my family safe and healthy. And that's the most important thing right now. And racing just was not the priority at that time. However, like many of you, running was a saving grace for me during that year. And I was running a lot of miles. There was nothing else to do, and I wasn't home with my kids. And I did actually end up getting to run a half marathon that fall, actually Longview and Fort Collins again. And they had the race open. So I ran the half marathon. It's still my half marathon PR. And I think just being really consistent during 2020, but also not having to stress about races, was really, really good for me. So turning 41 the following year, back to marathoning, things started to open up. My plan was to run the Colorado Marathon, which was going to be that spring. Started training for it, and I actually hadn't even signed up yet, but I totally in my head had decided that that was the one that I was doing, and started training, and then they canceled that one. So I was already fully into marathon training. So I'm like, well, I got to pick something else. There were not a lot of options. I wasn't willing to fly at that time. So it had to be something within a distance that I was willing to drive to. And so we found this one, another Revel one in Sun Valley. It was a pop-up, but it's very different than most of the other Revel races. It was still downhill, but it was much more of a slight downhill. It's very different than their like huge drop races. And it was in this beautiful area, and it was kind of my only option, honestly, within driving distance that I felt would work. And so I ran that one, and that was the first one that I actually documented on this channel. So all of these starting now are all documented on this channel. I actually videoed a lot of the training for that one as well, but I will link to these recap videos at least so you can see more about that particular race. Like I said, it was a pop-up. They don't have it anymore. It was just for that one weekend of that year. It was a really good experience, and I got a PR at that one, a 3:33:52. So a couple minutes off my best time. And I was trying to qualify for Boston again, because at this time there had been a lot of talk of that the field size for Boston was going to be way smaller because of COVID and just restrictions, right? And so I knew I didn't have a big buffer, and I figured it wouldn't probably be good enough to get me in. And so I wanted to qualify again for the next race in case I didn't get in. Plus, I started just getting this headspace of like, I just want to qualify every time. Like, I qualified once, I can do it again. I hadn't qualified in that Longview one, so I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it again, right? So this was a really big deal for me. And fast forward a little bit, I did find out that I didn't get into Boston. So I could have used that time I used for 2020, and the race was they ended up having the Boston race in, I think it was November of 2021, even though the Boston Marathon is always on Marathon Monday, Patriots Day in April. COVID just messed things up. So this is when they were going to have it in 2021, and I didn't get in, but I had this qualifier now for 2022. And by the time that 2021 race happened, or maybe it was just right after that, I found out that I got in. I had already signed up for the California International Marathon at the end of 2021 in December, ran that. I got a 20-second PR, 3:33:32. I absolutely loved that race. I ran a negative split. I've never felt so strong. I set a 10K PR during that training cycle. I think I set maybe a 5K PR. I'm trying to remember, but I just felt the fitness throughout that training block and absolutely loved it. I could not recommend that race more to people. So then going into what would have been 2022, I had my Boston spot, trained for Boston. At this time I was training completely on my own because I was a running coach, and I'd done so much research at this time and learned so much from other coaches. And yeah, so I ran Boston, and my big goal at Boston was to qualify for Boston at Boston. And I won't get into this too much. Again, we can maybe do a video about downhill racing, but I did have guilt about qualifying for Boston on such a big downhill race the first time. And even that other one was downhill, but I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't just have to run a downhill race to qualify for Boston. And it was just a big deal to me. Again, it's like no judgment to anyone else. This was just something that was important for me to prove to myself. And I did it. So I had to get under 3:40, and I got a 3:37:29 in my first Boston. And it was one of my favorite days. My parents were there, my kids were there, my husband was there. Just one of my most favorite days ever. And I was so elated to get to be there, and something that I'd worked so hard for. And it was super special. So going forward, after that, I then had a goal in mind to get a sub 3:30. So I already knew I could qualify for Boston. That was kind of ticked off the list. So what's the next big goal? I want to get a sub 3:30. I'd had these 2 races that were 3:33 something. So it felt like a doable goal, but we also have to understand that the farther and farther you get into this journey, the harder and harder it gets those PRs. Initially, you get those newbie gains pretty quickly. It gets much more challenging as it goes on. And so that's when I hired a running coach for myself, and it ended up being such a valuable experience. And I think it just helped me as a coach also to have my own coach, my own one-on-one coach during that time. And yeah, that was the very first thing. I want to break 3:30. That's what I told her, and got amazing training, trained for Houston first. And the goal was to break 3:30. It was a hot day, humid, and coming from Colorado winter was not ideal. but I just made sure that I really ran within myself, stayed smart, stayed conservative early, still ran a really, really strong race. And I ran a 3:30:54. So I was super close, but didn't quite make it. But I already had on books for the rest of the year. I had Boston again in April, and then I'd be running Chicago later that year. So in my mind, I'm like, Chicago's where it's going to happen. Boston's too hard of a course. Like, there's no way I'm going to break 3:30. But we're going to run it because I'm signed up for it. And yeah, let's just see how well I do. Well, as the training block transpired, I started to see that things were going really well. I felt really strong, was just building a lot of confidence. And I really did start to believe, like, no, maybe I can break 3:30 at Boston. And just one of those things where, if you don't believe it, then it's not going to happen. But once you start building that confidence and really trusting your training and utilizing those indicators to think about what you can achieve, all of that stuff really matters, and just what you think to yourself in your head. So I ran Boston 2023 and I ran a 3:29 even. Absolutely thrilled, was there with friends, and it was just incredible. You guys can watch the recap, but continue to train with my coach. That was kind of the whole plan. I was going to work with her for this full year of marathoning. I ran the Chicago Marathon in October, and it was not a good day for me. So you guys can kind of see the trajectory of all these marathons before. I was gaining a lot of fitness. I was improving. I was getting better. I was running more volume. I was running more intensity, which was just making me a stronger runner all around. And I had an incredible training block. I just didn't feel well that day. And that's the break sometimes, unfortunately, just because you train well, you're never promised a result just because you're ready for it. And that's really what happened to me. I didn't feel good pretty much from the very beginning. And I did the best I could. And the funny thing being that I actually qualified for Boston by a lot, like 12 minutes, because I would be turning 45 by the time I ran Boston again. Although I think they brought down the times during this time. So I still had enough to qualify and make the cutoff. I could have run Boston from that Chicago time, but I chose not to. 2 times at Boston is enough for now. Maybe someday I'll run it again, but there's just too many other races to run. So I got a 3:30:04 at that race, and I was disappointed, honestly. It was a tough day and had a hard time kind of wrapping my head around it, but you got to take the good with the bad in this sport, and you're going to have all of those emotions for sure. So after that, I decided I needed to just take a breather from going after these big goals. I had qualified for Boston multiple times. I had broken 3:30. I had a huge year of racing and just super intense. And it was kind of taking its toll. And so I needed to just take a step back and just kind of enjoy running for a while. So I ran the Dopey Challenge at the beginning of 2024 with 2 of my very best friends. And it was just all about fun and doing that whole experience. It's a 5K, 10K, half marathon and marathon in 4 days time, all in a row. And like I said, just for fun. We did not do it for time. And then later that year, I ran the New York City Marathon, which I have a whole video about. And I ran with someone and ran for charity, and it was about so much more than just a time. We were not going for time. And again, you can watch about that. But that was last year. And for this year, I'm running the Berlin Marathon. I actually qualified with my sub 3:30 at Boston 2023. I was able to use it to register for the qualifying process. If you're 45 and up on race day, which I will be 45. If you have under a 3:30 marathon, then you automatically qualify. So I had no intentions of running a major marathon this year, but because it's so hard to get into these, then I qualified. It was automatic. It just felt like I had to do it. So we're jumping at the opportunity, and it's overwhelming and exciting at the same time, but I will definitely let you guys know how that goes. So to wrap up, I just want to share some major takeaways that I've had through this journey that I think will be really helpful for you. I've obviously learned so much, and I know I'm not going to hit on everything, but these are just kind of the biggest ones that stood out to me. So number 1, progress isn't linear. Even when the training seems linear and the training is getting better and better, Unfortunately, the races don't always show that. So you got to just keep going. You can get faster as you get older. I know once I started having kids, I was like, my fastest days are behind me. I'll never get faster. And then I got faster once I had kids. I got faster into my 40s. So especially if you're starting later in life on this journey, you can build fitness for a really, really long time. So don't let your age be the determining factor in you saying to yourself that you can't get faster. How you talk to yourself matters. So I like to think of this quote from Henry Ford is whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So if you're constantly having this conversation with yourself that you're not going to be able to do something, then you're not going to be able to do something. It's only going to happen if you truly believe that you can do it. Nothing as far as just running the physical part of it, nothing's more important than consistency. Year after year, volume is the number one indicator of marathon success. And so you've got to have consistency and volume, and that's the number one way you're going to improve. Be relentless, but be flexible. So if something matters to you, don't give up on that dream. But at the same time, you have to be open to the fact that it may not go the path that you think it will or assume that it will. It might look very different, the trajectory to get to that goal. So don't give up on it just because it looks different. Training for and running marathons will change your life and transform who you are. I have this conversation with athletes all the time, how much it changes you as a person in outside of the running and just who you are every day. This is a long game, so you can hear that from me sharing my whole journey. It takes a long time, and in that 10 years of time where I wasn't running marathons, I was still running. I was still building fitness at that time. So if you think of it like that, it did take me a really long time. Once I really got very focused on the goal, it didn't take me a really long time, but I had built up a lot of fitness before that, which I think is really important to note. And this is still a long game. I want to do this for a long time. This is important to me to do long term, for the physical and mental benefits, and not just for times on a clock. You won't stay on this journey unless you fall in love with the process. So you have to be okay with boredom. It's a whole lot of get up and do it all over again. If you're always chasing race times, you're going to get burnt out. So you can't just be focused on the end result all the time. Lastly, there will come a day when you won't be setting PRs any longer. This is something that I'm really starting to learn right now and just having to wrap my head around. So there has to be a bigger why than a time on the clock. The journey evolves, you evolve, and in my mind, that's the very best part. Thanks for joining me on this long video, guys, of getting to hear a little bit about my marathon journey, or I guess all of it. If you guys have questions about anything specific, there's so much more I could say, but if you guys have any questions, place them below. I'm always happy to answer. If you're interested in coaching, I'll put that link below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.